Fungus. Not something you'd normally associate with fine woodworking. But I promise, after this video, your opinion will change. You'll see me fight with brass while I try not to burn my house down, use totally name brand glue, and admire my handiwork making blue tape bridges, all in an effort to make an Ambrosia Maple, brass, and walnut side table. The first part of any process is to select the board you want to use. As I'm making this a waterfall table, I want to make sure the ambrosia staining carries through nicely. Because of this, I'm going with the middle board. It's got the clearest maple wood and great ambrosia staining. You may be wondering, what is Ambrosia Maple? And that's a great question. In reality, it's just maple. But it's maple that at some point has been occupied by the ambrosia beetle, as indicated by the small pinholes throughout the board. These beetles then form a symbiotic relationship with a special type of fungus that creates these gray-blue streaks throughout the entire length of the board. These streaks will be the focal point of the waterfall edges on both sides of the table. Right now, I'm simply cutting the boards down to rough size. As you can see, these boards did come with a bit of a bow. Since they're only 4/4 or 1 inch thick, and I need them at 3/4 inch thick, a 1/4 inch bow is a bit too much. So, I need to carefully cut along one of the waterfall lines with a straight cut in order to reduce this to a more manageable 1/8 or below inch that I can then joint and plane to final size. Speaking of jointing and planing to final size, I unfortunately do not have a 9-inch jointer. So, if I want to flatten this board, which is 9 inches wide, I need to come up with another solution. Fortunately, there are some solutions. With shims, accelerator, Luke Tot, gee, I wonder where they got that name idea from, and some blue tape combined with a sled, which is just a long, flat piece of wood and a stop, we can use our planers as a jointer. I first apply tape, then I apply the liquid glue, and lastly I apply accelerator where needed, both on the head and on the wedges that I'm going to stuff between the pieces of tape that have the gaps. What you want to have happen is when you push down on the board to be flattened, the gap between it and the sled stays at the exact same size that it is when resting. This means when it goes through the planer, instead of being pushed down and carrying the twist, it will act as a jointer and flatten the top. One thing I often see people doing incorrectly here, both in actual work and in tutorials, is feeding the flattening sled through the wrong way. You want the fence to go first. That counters the force of the roller wheels, which is what could actually move your board, not the blades, as is a common misconception. Once you take a few passes on the planer and flatten the top, you can simply pop the board off, flip it around, and throw the other side through the planer, now that you have a flat reference face. It's already time to make the main waterfall feature. Since I already cut along this line vertically, I need to get as close to the edge as I possibly can so that these line up as accurately as possible. The more that I cut off the top, the more off it's going to be. Once all of the waterfalls are complete, it's time to route the slot for the center shelf. I made this fixture in another video to create some dados, but with a plunge router and an upcut spiral bit, it can be used to make this center line mortise as well. After drawing the line and the extents, I just line up the square line, and now my router will go along the center track. I could add some hard stops to the top and the bottom of this jig to make sure that I don't overshoot the lines. This tenon is going to be floating slightly though, so the exact width of the mortise is not super important. As long as I don't overshoot them by any large amount, I will be fine, and this speeds up the process quite a bit. This is totally unnecessary to include, but I find getting rid of these little fuzzies so satisfying with a piece of sandpaper, I couldn't help it. Also, because this is floating, I probably don't need to actually square the edges off, but I got these nice new Eric's Richter chisels to replace my old DeWalt ones, and I'm just looking for any excuse to use them. So here's a quick shot of me squaring off this mortise. So smooth. Let's get back to the tenon. To make this, I used a combination of a dado stack, a stop, and a miter sled. I set the dado stack to 1/2 inch, I set the board up against the sled and the stop, and run the top and the bottom over. I'll need to cut off the shoulders, but that's easy enough. Wouldn't be a Foxhole video without some hand sawing, so I'm cutting off the shoulders of this tenon using my Dozuki saw. Nothing much to talk about here, it's pretty straightforward. I will take this time to say, one of the other benefits of a Japanese pull saw is you can get a really premium blade that gets really smooth, nice cuts for a very reasonable amount of money. The saws that I use in my videos are the Gyokuchos from Amazon, and they cut through wood like butter. So if you're interested in getting some for yourself, I'll leave a link in the description for the ones that I have. Once the waterfalls, the mortise, and the tenon are all complete, it's time for a quick sand of the inside. I do this because it gets a lot harder to use an orbital sander against the tight 90-degree joints once things are glued up. Speaking of glue ups, it's time to line the boards up to apply blue tape so that we can glue the 45-degree miters just as we would a box. You may think that without the fourth side, or half of the third side, this wouldn't be possible. But, as you'll see in just a few moments, it's actually just as strong, just as rigid, even with 2.5 sides. You want to make sure that your tape is super tight. Really pull on it to get these joints up against each other. This will further simulate the pressure of clamping when you do the final fold. You'll want to make sure that you get glue all the way down into the joint. And because this is going to squeeze out when you fold things up, I added some blue tape to the edges to minimize cleanup after this is all set. How am I getting these pieces to stay tight like this? Well, the answer is more blue tape. You'll see in the next shot that I go from the tall side down to the short side with a couple pieces of tape, keeping them nice and taut. I will go in, as you'll see, with a square to make sure that these are 90 degrees. In fact, I make sure that these are a little tighter than 90 degrees because there is a little bit of deflection of the wood, and I want these to be extra tight. When the tape comes off, you'll see these are still 90 degrees. One thing that I did not show, and is very important to make note of, is you want to remove the squeeze out tape before the glue dries, otherwise that tape will end up glued to the edge. Now we finally get to see what the waterfall is going to look like. I specifically chose a heavy area of ambrosia staining for the primary side. For the shorter side, there's a little bit less, but I think what's already there, as well as the defined grain pattern of the maple itself, is more than enough to give us a nice look. I need to create these holes on the ends of the boards for the brass legs. Unfortunately, they're too long for my drill press, and I don't have a doweling jig. Fortunately, they're really not that hard to make. I just took a piece of hardwood the same width as the board I'm trying to drill into, used the drill press to drill a hole directly in the center, and put a couple guides on the edge that I can use to clamp. Just like that, put your drill in, and voila. You have a nice hole. It's ready to accept your rod. This one that you just saw is for the side shelf, and these two are going to be for the short side of the table that the legs will actually go into. There's one extra step for the center shelf. I have to hollow out the bottom, otherwise we wouldn't be able to fit the leg assembly once it's all put together. Let's jump to the model. Because these are 90 degrees from each other, no matter what, we have to cut a notch. If we do it in the top, it'll show on the side of the piece. If we do it on the shelf, it's coming from the bottom, so it won't be visible from most angles. For the brass rods themselves, I need to cut half circles at the ends the exact length I need to put them all together. I don't really have a lot of experience cutting metal. The best way that I could come up with to do this was to put a V-groove in a piece of MDF that I could then seat the brass rod and clamp it down on my drill press. I then used a carbide-tipped metal cutting drill bit using the drill press to cut about 4/5 of the way through. This allowed me then to move over to my vise and use a hacksaw to finish the cut the rest of the way through the rod. Once cut, I could use a round file to file down the one edge that was left and end up creating that nice, smooth U shape. It's a bit janky, but hey, it works. Getting back to the shelf and the tenon, here you can see that the mortise overruns the tenon by a good bit. It's definitely overkill for as narrow as this board is, but it's not going to hurt it. I also only glued the center third to allow for wood movement and make sure that this doesn't tear itself apart at the glue joints. Now watch me do some magic as I turn this one big board into 5 smaller boards. I figured most people don't really want to watch me joint, plane, and table saw a big rectangle into smaller rectangles, so we're going to jump right into making the drawer. I start by using a marking gauge to set the 1/2-inch depth for the dovetails. I then use a locking angle tool set at 1:6 ratio to mark out the dovetails. I can flip it over to get the exact same angle on both sides. I use a marking knife here for multiple reasons. For one, it's much more accurate than a pencil. But the bigger reason, number 2, is that it gives you a guideline for the chisel to both start and follow when you do the cleanup work. The first step is, of course, to go through with a saw and cut out against the inside of the waistlines. I highly recommend marking out the waist and double checking ahead of time, because you do not want to cut out the actual tails instead of the spaces between them. From this point, it's generally about 3 steps. You chip out on the top and the bottom, bit by bit, until you end up with a small center section, which you then take out as a big chunk. Then, I go back over to the vise, and I use those guidelines, as I mentioned, to chisel out exactly along the line. I'll then go back once I have these down to the 1/2-inch mark and chunk out the rest to keep those flat. Again, using that nice knife line to put the tip of my chisel into. Once these are complete, I copy these onto the mating board. You can see that I mark this C out, and the board that I'm cutting into also has C out on the outside side to help identify for assembly. Then it's more sawing, chipping, chunking, and fine chisel work to finish all 4 sides of the drawer. The last step before assembly is to route out the dado for the bottom. The long sides are easy and straightforward. The short sides require extra care and attention to not overshoot into the tails, because otherwise that would make it visible from the outside. You'll see here I create a U shape so that you won't be able to see this when it's assembled. I sanded the insides of these slightly. Again, it is the inside of a drawer that's not going to be visible, but still, I like to make sure that everything looks nice. Then, it's time to glue these up. I did do a dry fit beforehand, I just didn't show it since we're going to put it together here. But trust me, you want to test fit this first. I also decided, for no reason other than myself, to book match the bottom of the drawer with one of these pieces. Again, completely unnecessary, but I feel like it's these little things that really add that extra bit of character to each project. I am by no means a dovetail master, and realistically, this box didn't even need it. But I always think it's good practice, and they didn't turn out too bad. It's drawer slide time. You'll notice on these slides they have both round, vertical, and horizontal elongated holes. When working with hardwood, you want to make sure that you're using the elongated section to account for wood movement with humidity and temperature changes. I went with a 3-piece slide here to give myself a little extra drawer space when I pull it out. This is an 8-inch drawer slide, and it has 7.5 inches of pullout. Now time for the moment of truth. Thankfully, my measurements worked out, and everything fits together like a glove. It wouldn't be a maple build without some walnut. So I took some offcuts that I had lying around the shop and I cut it to size to fit the face frame. I'm punching in the holes to allow my drill to go through exactly at 3 inches apart in the dead center of the faceplate so that I can put the handle on. A quick sanding of the entire face to make sure that everything is level and we're really nearing completion now. For finishing, I'm going with my standard, which is Watco Natural Danish Oil. I like the combination of the pop it gives the grain as well as the protection it offers. Unlike your traditional oils, Danish oil is a combination of oils and some polyurethane, so you do get a little bit of that poly seal. Much to my surprise, it turns out that this maple is also curly, which, let me just say, I was pretty thrilled to find out. I love this step. It really makes everything, all the hard work and effort and patience and time and frustration pay off as you start to see the piece really come together as you had envisioned it in your mind. But wait, I hear you asking, what about welding the brass? And unfortunately, after trying and trying and trying, all I managed to do was create some silver slag and completely butcher the practice piece that I was trying to get the joint on. I didn't include the filming portion of this because it's full of expletives and failures, but needless to say, I certainly have a lot more to learn when it comes to working with brass. That said, fortunately, these pieces are not structural aside from the vertical support that these long legs provide. Everything else is visual, and I'm sure I'm going to get some flack for this, I ended up using epoxy. It has plenty of holding power for any of the weight and forces that are going to be presented to it, and I can wipe it off to make sure that it looks nice, smooth, and clear. So, for this iteration, I will consider it an experiment failed when it comes to welding brass, but a success when it comes to the design. And here it is, the finished product. An Ambrosia Maple, brass, and walnut side table with a drawer and a waterfall edge. I really like how the Ambrosia Maple complements the waterfall portion of the table. The brown staining actually meshes extremely well with the walnut, and the brass just adds that nice, sophisticated touch that I think elevates it that much further. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. And as always, until next time, this is Elijah from Foxhall Woodworking, signing out.